All right, why don't we get started? We are going to be in page 101 in your book and Judges 17. And I'll tell you right off the bat, we have a lot of material to get through. They crammed 4 or 5 chapters right in one lesson. And it's sort of all a continuous story, also sort of not. So there's a lot to get to, but I think the discussion that we end up having, I think, is the best part, being able to read some stuff, talk about it, bounce things off each other. So I don't want to limit any of that. If it does just take way too long and there's no way to do it, then we have the last week is technically a review week, so we do have some space if we need to push it to next week. But why don't we open up in a word of prayer? Father, thank you for this day that you've given us. I thank you that everyone was able to make it out to study tonight, and I just pray that you'd be with us during this time. Open our hearts and minds to the message that you have for us tonight, and help us understand a little bit more about your word and your character as it comes out in the text. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, so this is going to be a strange one. We've had a lot of weird and rough things throughout the book of Judges so far, and this is sort of the cherry on top. There are no holds barred on this one. It's very strange. And again, we're not going to follow the book precisely, but I'll still tell you sort of where we are. And we're going to skip the opening questions. However, in your book at the bottom of page 101, I do want to dig into this a little bit. It says, Judges ends by pointing us to Shiloh, a name for Jesus Christ. Okay, I want to dig into that. The book is oversimplifying it, and it's probably okay for its purposes here, but the book keeps bringing it up, and it's not exactly right. So for our purposes today, because Shiloh comes up a few times in this lesson, I want to actually look at the Genesis text that this comes from. So keep your spot in Judges 17 and turn to Genesis 49. Because saying that Shiloh is a name for Jesus is not quite accurate, and it oversimplifies what's happening. But I think we've delved enough into the Jewish worldview that we can probably start making a little bit of sense of what's happening. So in Genesis 49, you have the last words of Jacob, who is also known as Israel. He's on his deathbed, and he's giving out prophecy / blessing, talking about all of his children. Verse 9, he gets to Judah, and he says, Judah is a lion's whelp from the prey. My son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, as an old lion. Who shall rise up? Who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. Okay, so if you've ever heard of Shiloh, this is the main verse that it comes from. And if you're kind of scratching your head, yeah, we're on the right page here. It's strange, it's enigmatic, it's the last words of a man to all of his children, and he gives this strange idea that, okay, we can kind of make sense of half of verse 10. A scepter shall not depart from Judah. So the people of Judah, what becomes the tribe of Judah, they always take a leadership role in the nation. That's where the palace will be eventually. When they form a nation, that's where a lot of the kings come from. Judah is always prominent, and you even have, this text is where the lion imagery comes from with Judah. If you've ever heard Jesus referred to as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, as Jacob compares his son Judah to all phases of a lion, really. He a young lion, an older lion who's conquering. It gets turned into this image of Jesus, like Jesus is that metaphorical lion. He's the great one to come out of Judah. But then he mentions Shiloh. So he says, the lawgiver will not depart from Judah until Shiloh come. And you're like, is that a person? Is that a place? Who is Shiloh? What is Shiloh? And they just leave it hanging. They don't touch this at all until you get to the book of Joshua and Judges. And Shiloh, the location, the town, becomes the place where they put the Ark of the Covenant. That's where they set up the tabernacle. That's the forerunner to the Jewish temple. It's a big tent-like temple structure. This is where they meet with God. This is where God dwells. This is where all the sacrifices are done. So you've been waiting for something to do with Shiloh for a long time. And whoever this Shiloh is, at the end of verse 10 it says, unto him, unto Shiloh, shall the gathering of the people be. And when you dig into the Hebrew, it's sort of like, this is where the nation, Shiloh is who the nations will come to. The people, it's not just people, it's the people, like the nations. So you have this idea right from Genesis that Judah is going to be a big deal as far as national Israel's leadership, and they're waiting for whatever Shiloh is to come, and the nations will be gathered to that person or something. And then you go, okay, what is Shiloh? Well, Shiloh is the place where the presence of God dwells. That's what it becomes for a large part of Israel's history. That's where the tabernacle is. That's where the Ark of the Covenant is. So it's not crystal clear. It's oblique. It's this poetic thinking that the ancient people seem to have, where they go, okay, we're waiting for Shiloh. Shiloh ends up being the physical presence of God, because that's where the Ark of the Covenant is. And eventually the idea that from Judah, you have Shiloh, the physical presence of God. That's where the nations will come to. So saying it's a name for Jesus, it's not that simple, okay? But as you think allegorically, as you think in terms of Israel's very, very long history, you get this idea that, okay, the place that is the presence of God, something indicating the presence of God will come, all nations will gather to that thing. And that's how you get this idea that, oh, okay, Jesus, he is the ultimate one of Judah. He's the Lion of the tribe of Judah. He is the presence of God. He gets compared to, he ends up being associated with the temple all throughout his ministry. He considers himself the new temple. He's the presence of God, so he is Shiloh in a very metaphorical sense. Does this make as much sense as it should? Okay.
He's going to rule, so the scepter is...
Yeah, and the scepter is still his, yeah. Yeah, and there's other kingly imagery we could get into, but since Shiloh keeps coming up in these chapters, I thought we should at least discuss that. And if you think you understand like 75% of what I'm saying, that's where I am too. Like, you almost understand, like, you sort of get what I'm saying, but it's very metaphorical, it's not, oh, this verse just says this. It's big ideas lumped on top of each other over a couple thousand years, and you end up with a metaphorical, typological image of Jesus, not so much, oh yeah, clearly Shiloh is just Jesus. It's not that. Okay? Sorry for the long lecture to start off with, but we needed to get that out of the way. And then, going forward, we will dive into Judges 17. And like I said, this is strange and disturbing, and there's a lot of Old Testament in it. Okay, so you're going to be seeing things all throughout these chapters that are going to remind you of all sorts of other things from the Old Testament so far, and we'll get into that as they come up. Okay, so chapter 17, let's just start in verse 1. And there was a man of Mount Ephraim, whose name was Micah. And he said unto his mother, Hey, you know the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, about which that you cursed, and spake also of in my ears? Behold, the silver's with me. I took it. And his mother said, Blessed be thou of the Lord, my son. And when he had restored the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver unto the Lord from my hand for my son, to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I will restore it unto thee. Yet he restored the money unto his mother, and his mother took 200 shekels of silver, and gave them to the founder, who made thereof a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. And the man Micah had a house of gods, and made an ephod and teraphim, and consecrated one of his sons, who became his priest. In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Okay, you get a strange little, where do these people come from? We've been dealing with heroic judges. We just got off the story of Samson and his many feats. And then you just get this random guy, Micah, who stole some silver from his mom. What's that? Borrowed. Yeah, she was really happy with his honesty, perhaps more than we would be. Now, do notice that, so they decide to take the silver, they're going to make graven images and a molten image. They make an ephod. Micah is a very religious pagan. He's got a whole shrine house of gods, it says. But they're still talking about the Lord. Did you notice that? It sounds almost normal. Okay, the son was kind of scummy. He stole money from his mother, but he was honest about it. She goes, great, this is awesome. This was dedicated to the Lord anyway. And then it just kind of devolves very quickly. Okay, in verse 6, do we know, nope, verse 5. Okay, do we remember what an ephod is?
The garment?
Yeah, can you be more specific?
No. I got that.
All right.
It's sort of like a vest.
Yeah, okay.
An upper body thing.
Yeah.
To signify, something special.
Yeah, so it's a priestly garment. That's what I was more looking for. Yeah, not the specifics of, the vest, yeah. So it's a priestly garment, and it is typically, it's always designated to the priestly class. And do we know what teraphim are?
Household items?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Do you just get that from context?
Well, that is a translation.
Oh, nice. You got the helpful one there. So the teraphim are household idol little statues. So he's got his whole house of different deities, the different statues and idols set up. And I think the book asks a funny question. Question 4. How many of the 10 commandments did Micah and his mother break in religious practice? Yeah.
If it was more than 10, they probably
Yeah. It's a short paragraph, and yet you get a lot packed in there. You get some theft, you get multiple gods, you get the graven images.
lying.
Yeah. Yeah.
About honoring your mother and father.
Yeah. Eventually. Yeah. Yeah, as long as you give the money back eventually, it's fine. That's how I understand that. Question 5. On what did Micah base his religion?
What was right in his own eyes.
Yeah. So we've talked about it a lot, but in the book of Judges, we finally got to that famous verse in verse 6. In those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. So even though we've talked about it, it doesn't come up until chapter 17, and between now and the end of the book, it gets used 4 times, some form of it. So at the end of the book, the author is really pushing this idea on you. Like if you haven't gotten it until now, he's just throwing this very consistent phrase right at you for a while. Okay, let's continue on with verse 7. The story continues. We good? Oh. The men are on it. All right. All right, verse 7. All right. Verse 7. And there was a young man out of Bethlehem, Judah. Everything good?
Read it that way?
No, he went downstairs.
There's nothing that way. It's quiet.
It's an old building. Makes some noises. Yeah, when the heat pops on, I'm convinced about a dozen times a year that there's someone or something around, yeah. Oh, yeah. I get you. All right, let's try again. Verse 7. And there was a young man out of Bethlehem, Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. And the man departed out of the city from Bethlehem, Judah, to sojourn where he could find a place, and he came to Mount Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. And Micah said unto him, Whence comest thou? And he said unto him, I'm a Levite of Bethlehem, Judah, and I go to sojourn where I may find a place. And Micah said unto him, Dwell with me, and be unto me a father and a priest, and I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by the year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. So the Levite went in. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man was unto him as one of his sons. And Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then said Micah, Now know I that the Lord will do me good, seeing I have a Levite as my priest. Okay. Question 7 in your book. Based on Micah's conclusion in verse 13, what would you say motivated his religious acts? What's in it for him? Yeah. Yeah, and there's some shady things going on with his Levite too, right? He's
Advantage of his family tree, his family lineage.
yeah,
And Micah seems to be covering all the bases.
yeah,
Covering everything. Somewhere you're going to get a blessing because you got everything covered.
yeah,
And now he's got Levite, because the Levite, tribe of Levi is where the priests that bring nicely duties were assigned. So.
yeah. Yeah, you got a proper Israelite priest, the proper Levite, who seems perfectly content to get paid to not be at the tabernacle where he should be, or, worshiping, doing some sort of ceremonies in this house of idols. And yeah, the Levite comes up a lot. Sort of have a tale of 2 different Levites in these chapters. But let's look at 18. First, in chapter 18, we're going to start hearing about the tribe of Dan. Do we remember anything from the earlier lessons about the tribe of Dan?
Weren't they forced back into the hills?
Yeah, do you remember why?
No.
Yeah, do you remember anything about them?
Weren't they supposed to go down to
Yeah. Yeah, that's the tribe where they were supposed to go and take their spot in the promised land, but the Amorites were there, and the Amorites were just too much for them. And we had a big discussion on, like, yeah, they blamed it that, oh, well, the Amorites, they have those iron chariots. We can't do anything against that. But the whole time it's been an issue of faith, and God is fighting the battles for them, so why weren't they taking the land? And they were the group who actually just, like, they kind of just had to run to the hills. They couldn't even come down out of the hills into the valley area because the Amorites were there, and they didn't take their land. So they crop back up. Chapter 18, verse 1. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in. For unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribe of Israel. And the children of Dan sent of their family 5 men from their coast, men of valor, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and to search it. And they said unto them, Go and search the land. Who, when they came to Mount Ephraim to the house of Micah, they lodged there. All right, first off, it's worth noting, if you have any picture of ancient Israel as a map in your mind somehow, I don't know how many people do. Pastor does, yes, that is correct. Yeah, so you got a strip of land. It's kind of like like California shaped, but smaller. So Dan, according to the allotments that were given in Joshua, when they went into the promised land, Joshua told everyone where they were supposed to go. Dan was supposed to be basically, think of California sort of, down to the southwest. That's where their allotment was. That's the area that they wouldn't take. So they say, okay, send out the spies. What does that remind you of? There should be bells going off right there.
When they were in the promised land, they were sending spies to see, what the enemy was like, or the people were like, and they came back, and one of the 2 of them said that they should go and take the land, and the others told them that our people were too big and too mighty, so they ended up staying in the promised, or the wilderness.
Mm-hmm.
50 years.
Yeah, exactly. So you should, they're sending out spies into what they hope is their promised land, and you should instantly have pictures of the 12 spies that were sent out, and then only the 2 spies give the good report with Moses. So when it's Joshua's turn, he only sends out 2 spies into the promised land, and that's when they end up taking the promised land. But these people are spying out, they're spying out the wrong land. And that's what's the funny thing. So I told you they're supposed to be in the southwest, but they couldn't take the Amorites. So where they end up sending them, what ends up being settled as Dan, is about as far north as you can possibly get in Israel. So they're way off base here. Okay. Verse 3. Still talking about the spies. When they were by the house of Micah, they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite, and they turned in thither and said unto him, Who brought thee thither, and what makest thou in this place, and what hast thou here? He said unto them, Thus and thus dealeth Micah with me, and he has hired me, and I am his priest. They said unto him, Ask counsel, we pray, of God, that we may know whether or way which we go shall be prosperous. And the priest said unto them, Go in peace before the Lord. Wow, I'm having trouble reading. Go in peace. Before the Lord is your way wherein ye go. All right. Few tongue twisters in there. What do you think about this Levite as a priest?
Clearly didn't seek any counsel at all. It's just like, whatever way you go is what God wanted for you. So just go.
Yeah. Yet, what kind of impression does this give you of the spies now? Like, they recognize him as a man of God?
I guess then maybe if August was a Levite, then he had some standing, despite where he was actually,
Mm-hmm.
with serving with Micah and all these other gods around him.
Yeah. Yeah, so not only is Micah, who's basically taking money that he shouldn't to do rituals and be a priest in a house of idols and all sorts of things, he's still claiming to speak for the Lord, and they seem to be fully fine with that, these priests, or these 5 spies. All right, and verse 7. Then the 5 men departed and came to Laish, and saw the people that were therein, how they dwelt careless, after the manner of the Zidonians, quiet and secure, and there was no magistrate in the land that might put them to shame in anything. And they were far from the Zidonians, and had no business with any man. All right, so I don't know what we're supposed to know about the Zidonians from back then, but apparently they had a pretty cool and easy life. They were just kind of pretty laid back, apparently, because he compares these people to them. So they find this area far north, Laish. And then there's a few... Okay, so what ends up happening, we won't read it. It's a very long explanation in the text. So the 5 spies, they find Laish. They're like, hey, these people seem pretty chill. The city's unprotected. And they don't really have any... He said they have no magistrate, so they're not linked to any larger empire that they need to worry about. So they go, okay, great, cool. We found our spot. They go back and tell the rest of the leaders of the tribe of Dan. And they decide to send a large army north to the area of Laish. But first, they get to our buddy Micah. A lot of action seems to center around this. And what they do is the army stands at the gate of Micah's house, and they call him and the priest out, and they're talking to him, and like, hey, why are you guys here? As the 5 spies from earlier decide, for whatever reason, that, hey, we know about all the stuff that Micah has in those shrine houses, all the, it's all made out of silver and the statues and stuff. So they steal the ephod, they steal all the idols. It's all worth a lot of money. So pick up the story in chapter 18, verse 18. So, and these spies, they went into Micah's house and fetched the carved image, the ephod, and the teraphim, and the molten image. Then they said unto the priest, then the priest said unto them, What do ye? And they said unto him, Hold thy peace, lay thine hand upon thy mouth, and go with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for thee to be a priest unto the house of one man, or that thou be a priest unto a tribe and a family in Israel? And the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod and the teraphim and the graven image, and went in the midst of the people. So they turned and departed, and put the little ones and the cattle and the carriage before them. And when they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men that were in the houses near Micah's house were gathered together, and overtook the children of Dan. And they cried unto the children of Dan, and they turned their faces, and said unto Micah, What aileth thee? What's wrong that thou comest with such a company? And he said, You've taken away my gods which I made, and the priests, and you're gone away. And what have I more? And what is this that ye say unto me? What ails thee? And the children of Dan said unto him, Let not thy voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon thee, and thou lose thy life, and the lives of thy household. And the children of Dan went their way, and Micah saw that they were too strong for him. And he turned and went back unto his house. And they took the things which Micah had made, and the priest which he had, and came unto Laish, unto a people that were quiet and secure, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon. Okay. This strange interaction with the people stealing the idols, with, hey, priest, why don't you just come with us? You have Micah who comes out with a whole bunch of people, chases him down. They're like, yo, man, what are you doing here coming after us with all these people? And he says, well, you stole all my stuff. What are you talking about? Who's the good guy here? Like, who am I supposed to like in this story?
The priest condoned the action of them stealing from.
Well, he was supposed to
He
be
was
a
just-
son to him.
He was just.
Yeah. Yeah, what does this make you think about the priest now? Like, you didn't love him before. What's really amplified here?
Guess he's got to have some kind of loyalty to all these people that do it.
I think self-preservation.
Self-preservation? Yeah, and I would kind of bet that they said, like, oh, why would you be a priest just for this one household? Be a priest for all of us. It probably came with a pay raise, Now you're the official priest of the whole tribe, Yeah, it's an odd thing because for a minute you're tempted to feel sorry for Micah because he runs out. He's, hey, you stole all my stuff, and it's like he has people with him. He's thinking about it, but he's like, oh, this isn't going to go well. And he just kind of has to go home with nothing. And you're like, oh, wait, but isn't he sort of... We're not really supposed to like any of these people. Like, if you're looking for, oh, yeah, here's the godly Abraham. Here's the Moses that, be like Moses, follow his example. You're not getting any of that from this section of Judges. I did want to point out, I don't know if there's a connection, but it's in here, and in case any of you catch something later that I didn't. The tribe of Dan sends 600 men that are armed to take Laish. Okay, just keep that in mind. Because later in the story, we have 600 men at a certain point. And I think, well, there's so much symbolism and poetry and parallelism all throughout this book. It doesn't seem coincidental, but I have no idea why. But they are very specific about 600 men here and later in the story that we'll get to. So keep it in mind. Maybe you'll catch something. We're sort of on page 106 in your book. All right, so we talked about the robbery and now Dan's victory to finish up chapter 18 in verse 30. And the children of Dan, after taking Laish, the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. And they set up Micah's graven image, which he had made, all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. Why would they say that, especially that last verse? Seems like an odd detail.
Because they worship the same gods that Micah. Right?
Oh yeah, no, they're setting up the stuff they stole. I more mean Shiloh. Like, why is this mentioned? Could be time frame. Any other thoughts?
It's because they had a place to go. They could have gone to Shiloh as opposed to worshiping random idols in their local city.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I saw with it. Because at first I thought, oh, are they setting up, like, is this near it? No, it's not. I looked on the map. Shiloh is, like, in the center of the country, whereas this new area of Dan is in the far north. But yeah, for the first time, which is interesting because we've been dealing with idolatry all throughout the book of Judges. And for the first time, they feel the need to say, like, yeah, they set up all this stuff in their city, even though the temple was in, the tabernacle, the Ark of the Covenant was in Shiloh. It's sort of like Greg said, they're kind of pointing out for the first time, like, you didn't have to do this. There was actually real access to God, not through whatever they're doing that's right in their own eyes. And there's still the idea that, okay, they're doing this wrong thing, but Shiloh, the presence of God is still available. Like, yeah, they're lost in their sin, they're doing their own thing. Even though, hey, Shiloh, the presence of God, salvation in a sense, the ability to follow God properly, it's right there the whole time. And it's an interesting thing that they're pointing out amidst all these very bizarre stories of theft and war and taking land that's not yours and all sorts of stuff. They kind of point out, like, hey, Shiloh is still there the whole time. Yeah, so it's fuzzy. It's not something that they put a fine point on, which is how the rest of this book is going to go. So be warned. Oh, sure.
It's not like they were setting up like a religious, everyone worship, you still have a God in Israel, but if you want to worship these other gods, you find it all in one place.
Right. Yeah, they have like a whole pantheon set up, yeah. Yeah, even though they have the real thing close enough. It's not close, but it was still an option. The real worship of God was still an option for them. Okay, sort of on page 107 in your book. And I think we can get through this lesson. And now we get into some of the most uncomfortable stuff in probably the Bible. But we got this story of civil war in chapter 19, 20, and 21. So chapter 19, we start with the reason that the civil war happens. So 19, verse 1. And it came to pass in those days, when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. Okay, so once again, we see that phrase being repeated. Hey, there was no king in Israel. And we have another Levite. And the first one surprised you, I hope, that, oh, the Levite, the priest, the man of God. Oh, what awesome thing's he going to do? Oh, yeah, he's going to be a horrible person the whole time. So we have another unnamed Levite, and he has a concubine. And so I'll just explain a little bit of this instead of reading the text for this. So we've discussed what concubines are before. They're like, we don't have a class for it in modern day where they're not married, but they're it's like a wife, but like if you had tiers to the multiple wives that you could have, it's like they typically don't have a spot in the inheritance, but they're sort of part of the family. They're under the protection. It's a weird thing that it was in the ancient Near East, we just don't have them today. Okay, so the concubine is unfaithful to the Levite, and they split up for like 4 months. And eventually, the Levite goes to her father's house, where she had retreated to. And I don't know if his father-in-law, I don't know if he didn't know exactly what happened, or maybe he's just really happy that this upright, great priest Levite came back for her. And he is just thrilled to have the Levite at his house. And they're there for They were going to stay for 3 days, and then the Levite made up with the concubine. They were going to go and get on with their journey. And the father-in-law says, well, no, stay with me tonight, and you can leave tomorrow. And he's like, so he stays with him for the night, and then he's going to take off in the morning. And the father-in-law's like, well, chill out, have some breakfast, leave in the afternoon. The afternoon comes, and he's like, well, okay, look, it's like 4 or 5 o'clock, okay? You guys should just have dinner with us, just stay, leave tomorrow. And if this sounds weird and you're like, why does he keep talking about this cyclical time frame? That's exactly what the text is like. And you're sitting there going, can he leave? Do I need all this information? I was looking at it, and I don't know what the purpose of that is. I don't know if you're supposed to be thinking about, if you remember the story of Isaac, a servant went and got his wife for him, and Rebecca, he finds her at a well, and there's this whole thing. The servant goes into the father's household, they talk, and he wants the servant to stay for a long period of time, but the servant doesn't. I don't know if you're supposed to be thinking like that, but this guy ends up staying, and then the story ends very differently than the great patriarch Isaac and his wife Rebecca. Or maybe it's just that the father-in-law's hospitality, like his good intentions, go horribly wrong. I'm not sure. Did you say it's a trap? Yeah, so I don't know exactly what's going on with that, but there's this cycle in it. So eventually, he tries the same thing again. The father-in-law's like, okay, guys, leave after lunch. Lunch comes and goes, and he says, well, just stay till morning. He goes, no, okay, look, we got to get going. So the Levite, the concubine, and it sounds like I'm setting up a joke. I'm not. And the servant. Yeah. Yeah, they all leave. And they're traveling. And predictably, because they left so late in the day, the sun starts going down. And they say, okay, well, we need to stop somewhere for the night at some point. Okay, so they find the town of, I think it's Gibeah, the Gibeonites. And no one's out, no one's about, so they're just like going to sleep in the town square. That's all they have open to them. And someone stops and decides to invite them into their house. So we're going to pick this up in chapter 19, verse 18. Okay, so this is the Levite talking to an old man who is being hospitable. And the Levite said unto him, we are passing from Bethlehem, Judah, toward the side of Mount Ephraim. From thence am I, and I went to Bethlehem, Judah, but I am now going to the house of the Lord. And there is no man that receiveth me to house. Yet there is both straw and provender for our asses, and there is bread and wine also for me, and for the handmaid, and for the young man which is with thy servants. There is no want for anything. And the old man said, peace be with thee. Howsoever, let all thy wants lie upon me, only lodge not in the street. So he brought him into his house, and gave provender unto the asses, and they washed their feet, and did eat and drink. Now, as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. And the man, the master of the house, went out unto them, and said unto them, nay, my brethren, nay, I pray you, do not so wickedly. Seeing this man is come into mine house, do not this folly. Behold, here's my daughter, and a maiden, and his concubine. Them will I bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. Okay. What other biblical story is screaming in your head right now? Lot. Oh, word for word, that phrase of like, hey, yeah, that man that's in your house, send him out to us. Almost word for word. And I think it's very intentionally, like, yeah, the events are similar, and the author is kind of pointing back to that. Okay, so if you remember that story with Lot, that's when Lot is living in Sodom? Yeah, I couldn't remember if he was in Sodom or Gomorrah. So, yeah, he's in Sodom. God's going to destroy it, but because God loves Abraham, basically, he sends the two angels. They're going to get Lot, tell him what's going to happen, and hopefully leave. And that's when this weird scene takes place in the story of Genesis. So maybe you would need more time to think about it. I don't know. What do you think is being said here that the author of Judges points back to that story so vividly? Yeah, so he's definitely saying something about the land, right? So you want to take note of this kind of stuff whenever, like, okay, again, ancient Near Eastern thinking, it's very poetic thinking. That's how I like to talk about it. So the original story that he's pointing to with the language that he uses, it's Sodom and Gomorrah, a town under judgment of God. And he uses this story and words it the exact same way so that you think like, oh, wow. But we're not talking about Sodom and Gomorrah now. We're talking about people in Israel. So you're mentally linking Israel, the state that they're in now by this end of this time, and the state that Sodom and Gomorrah was in. Like, they're wicked, they become evil, and judgment is coming. So now you remember what happened with Lot. They said, well, no, I'm not sending these men out. You remember he offered his daughters to the crowd, and they didn't want that, and the angels blinded the men. They got out of the situation. The Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed. So you have almost the exact same setup, and then we will read verse 25. But the men would not hearken to him. So the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them. And they knew her and abused her all the night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. Then came the woman in the dawning of the day and fell down at the door of the man's house where her lord was, till it was light. And her lord rose up in the morning and opened the door of the house and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. So, if you already have the story of Lot in your head, you think, again, like, oh, well, I know how this story goes. And it goes as worst case scenario as it possibly could have gone. He actually sends out the concubine. She ends up getting killed over the course of the night, and she kind of crawls back and dies on the doorstep. So again, this is all pointing you not towards, like, especially with the imagery that he's using, we've been watching this cycle of Israel devolving over a few hundred years to the point where the author expresses them, hoping you link them to Sodom and Gomorrah. Not only that, the situation is even worse than what happened before, the story that you remember. Okay, so in a weird move, the Levite decides, you know what I'm going to do? The best idea here, I'm going to dismember this dead woman into 12 pieces, and he sends a piece to the leader of every tribe in Israel as a shocking message to be like, hey, this is what the Gibeonites did to the concubine of a priest. he fails to mention in his letters that, oh yeah, I'm the one who sort of threw her to the wolves. He leaves that detail out when he's looking for sympathy from people. But the leaders of Israel are outraged, and they decide, okay, you know what, we're going to go after these men, these Gibeonites who did this. Look in chapter 20, verse 18. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me back up a second, because we skipped chapter 20. So the Israelites decide that they have to do something about these men from Gibeah, and they say, hey, it's in the tribe of Benjamin. Gibeah is the city in the tribe of Benjamin. So they say, hey, you know what, give us the men who did this, and we will have them executed, there will be justice, and we'll call it a day. The tribe of Benjamin refuses to give them up. So all of Israel, the other 11 tribes, band together and they say, hey, we're going to send an army. We're going to make this right. Okay, so verse 18, they've gathered together the army. Verse 18, and the children of Israel arose and went up to the house of God and asked counsel of God and said, which of us shall go up first to the battle against the children of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Now, you may not, because this was a couple months ago. Do you remember that verse that we talked about? That who shall go up first to the battle? The Lord says, Judah shall go up first. Do we remember the context? What was happening last time? Like, why is this significant? Yeah, so chapter 1, Judges chapter 1 starts off with them, they're going into the promised land. They're doing what the whole first 5 books of the Bible has been leading up to, 6 books actually with Joshua. They're going into the promised land. They inquire of God and they say, hey, who should go up first? And he says, Judah shall go up first. So again, Judah being the scepter, the place of power, the lion, Judah goes in first into the promised land to pronounce God's judgment on the heathen, the wicked people in the land, and to start manifesting the promise that God had made to them hundreds and hundreds of years before. And now, again, word for word, the exact same phrase is being used as they're going to attack Israelites. So before it was like the holy mission of God that they were doing first, and now it's brutal civil war with their own people. So again, as we're watching the devolving cycle of Judah's moral compass, almost as like a bookend in the book of Judges, you have who shall go up first? Judah. At first it's really positive, and then at the end it's horrible and the result of a terrible situation. All right, so we have Judah going up first. And look at verse 20. And the men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin. And the men of Israel put themselves in array to fight against them at Gibeah. And the children of Benjamin came forth out of Gibeah and destroyed the town to the ground of the Israelites that day, 22,000 men. And the people, the men of Israel, encouraged themselves, and they set their battle again in array in the place where they put themselves in array the first day. And the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until evening, and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, shall I go up again to the battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother? And the Lord said, go up against him. And the children of Israel came near against the children of Benjamin the second day. And Benjamin went forth against them out of Gibeah the second day, and destroyed down to the ground of the children of Israel again 18,000 men. All these drew the sword. Okay, what just happened there? Something big happened. They were beaten twice. They inquired of God. Why do you think this happened? Was God wrong? Like, you know the answer is no, but what happened?
Maybe because they were okay with all the other idols in the land instead of just worshiping God like they should have done from the beginning. They
Mm-hmm.
just kept God in their mind, worshiping Him. They were grabbing all the other things, too. So they were like okay with what the other tribes were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing.
Little judgment going on.
Yeah.
Little judgment going on.
Mm-hmm.
Against the badder guys.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because that's the thing, because...
Or guy using the badder guys to
Right.
judgment before it goes the other way.
Yeah.
He's going to do two things.
Yeah, so, because we've been seeing this all throughout the book of Judges, and we've talked about it at length, how seemingly normal, non-supernatural things like armies going to war, as we would talk about it, it's like, oh, God raised up this nation to judge Israel for their sins, or vice versa. And now this is exactly what you have happening within Israel itself. Like God said, yeah, technically Benjamin are the bad guys in this situation. But you realize, the rest of Israel is still a wreck. They are still worshiping idols. They still don't actually have the blessing of God. Even though he tells them to go up, it's to punish them as well. And if you happen to do the math, the first day they lose 22,000 men. The second day they lose 18,000 men. If you ever come across the number 40,000, if you come across the number 40 in the Bible, it's always a number of testing or judgment. 40 years in the wilderness, God's judgment on the people. Jesus, 40 days in the desert, it's the time of testing. Noah, it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, that's judgment on the earth. So, yeah, I don't find that coincidental. Okay. And then day 3, third time's a charm, look in verse 30. Verse 30, and the children of Israel went up to battle against the children of Benjamin on the third day, and put themselves in array against Gibeah as at other times. And the children of Benjamin went out against the people, and were drawn away from the city. And they began to smite of the people, and kill as at other times in the highways, of which one goeth up to the house of God, and the other to Gibeah in the field, about 30 men of Israel. And the children of Benjamin said, they are smitten down before us, as at the first. But the children of Israel said, let us flee, and draw them from the city unto the highways. And all the men of Israel rose up out of their place, and put themselves in array at Baal-tamar. And the liers in wait of Israel came forth out of their places, even to the meadows of Gibeah. And there came against Gibeah 10,000 chosen men out of all Israel. And the battle was sore, but they knew not that evil was near them. And the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed of the Benjamites that day 25,100 men. All these drew the sword. So, for some reason, they kind of double back and re-explain the battle in more precise terms. I don't know why there's 2 versions written out. Without me saying anything more, does this remind you of anything? Does it remind you of another battle? Or is it a little too hard to understand how it was being portrayed?
I don't know, it's just one when they flew away from the city and set the city on fire, I think, and burnt it down while they were away from the city.
Yeah.
I don't remember where that was.
Yeah, does anyone remember that? It came up on Sunday briefly. Remember the Battle of Ai. So this was after Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho. Pastor had the song about it on Sunday. The big battle, first going into the Promised Land, Battle of Jericho, their giant walls, done away with. The Battle of Ai was the smaller city. There was a sin problem. They didn't have the victory at first. But then they have this plan to, hey, we lost yesterday, so we'll send in some men, we'll pretend that we're losing again, and we kind of draw the fighting men away from the city while we have other people hiding around and go and set the city on fire. And it makes it clear, if we read the whole rest of chapter 20, seeing the city on fire was the signal to, hey, now we actually have more people laying in wait out in the fields, and we're just all going to come in and destroy everything. So once again, they're taking you back to the destruction of a wicked pagan city that was part of taking the promised land, but now it's not the people of Ai who are being destroyed this way, it's a tribe of Israel, the tribe of Benjamin. And they kill, the only people who survive from the tribe of Benjamin are soldiers who managed to run away. So it specifically says that there are 600 men of Benjamin who survive. So the only survivors of Benjamin are men of a warrior age. And that's where I told you before Dan sent 600. I don't know if there's a connection, but we have the same number twice in the same story, so I'm not sure what we're supposed to see there. Okay, so we're sort of out of time, but we need to finish the story. So let me just tell you. After this battle takes place, this big civil war, the tribe of Benjamin is decimated. Everyone starts to feel really bad about it. They say, well, they're still the tribe of Benjamin. They're our people, they're our brothers, and now there's 600 men. They're going to go extinct. So chapter 20 and 21, they sort of start taking you back in small steps to stuff that you missed, that wasn't talked about because they were talking about the battle. Because they say, oh man, Benjamin's going to go extinct. And you think, well, they can marry other people, right? Well, they go, oh yeah, by the way, remember before the battle when we were really mad at them and we all made a vow to God that we wouldn't let them marry any of our daughters? Oh, oops. So there's that. And then they say, well, yeah, but did anyone not make that vow? And they go, oh, well, remember when we made that vow that anyone who doesn't come up with us to fight against Benjamin, that we would kill them? That old thing. So you have this weird dual situation where they're like, you know what? There was that one group, the people of Jabesh Gilead. They didn't come up to battle with us, which means we have to kill them. But they didn't make that vow. So, problem solving. We're going to go down, kill everyone in Jabesh Gilead except for the unmarried women. Problem solved. Great idea. But there's a problem. There's only 400 of them left. So they go, well, there's 600 of these men. There's only 400 women. So they give them, because, they didn't make the vow not to marry them. So 200 left. And then they go back into problem-solving mode. Chapter 21, verse 18. So they're explaining, okay, so howbeit we cannot give them wives of our daughters, for the children of Israel have sworn, saying, cursed be he that gives a wife to Benjamin. Then they said, behold, there's a feast of the Lord in Shiloh yearly, in a place which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east of the highway that goeth from Bethel to Shechem, on the south side of very clear directions. Verse 20, therefore they commanded the children of Benjamin, saying, all right, here's what you do. Go lie in wait in the vineyards, and see, and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in dances, for this festival, then come ye out of the vineyards, and catch you every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh. Just go and take one, and go to the land of Benjamin. Perfect solution, because 22, it shall be, when their fathers or their brothers come unto us to complain, that we will say unto them, be favorable unto them for our sakes. Just take a chill. Because we reserved not to each man his wife in the war, for ye didn't give them at this time, that you would be guilty, because they stole them. So you didn't give them your daughters with permission. So you guys are in the clear. Verse 23, and the children of Benjamin did so, and took them wives according to the number of them that danced, whom they caught, and they went and returned unto their inheritance, and repaired the cities and dwelt in them. And the children of Israel departed thence at that time, every man to his tribe and to his family, and they went out from thence, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. There's a lot to that. One, what do you guys think? Just what strikes you about that? It could be 100 different things. That won't be on the recording. It's fine.
Judges, it makes it seem like you should never make a vow to God, because unless God commands you to do something in particular, like your vow is going to turn against you in some way. The guy who said he'd sacrifice whatever the first thing he saw was, he lost his daughter. These people, said, oh, well, we just, basically took away the future of Benjamin by killing all of them and women, and now we have to come up with some hack way where we're only, where we're giving these people wives, but in reality they are breaking their own vow by doing this, because they're saying, well, we're going to let you take them, which is the same thing as them giving them. But they try to reason their way out of these things, and it's not really, it's not really like,
Right.
they're not really following their own vow. I think so.
That seems fair. It's not kosher, yeah. Yeah, any other thoughts there?
Women had it really rough.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so remember the original crime that this is all centered around. It was centered around the rape and murder of one woman. And now the solution is, hey, 200 of you, go hide in the bushes and try to steal someone when they come out.
Well, there's a social culture learning experience here in the Book of Judges, really.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Because, almost all these stories that we've had over the weeks, always seems to be no problem for guys getting up their daughters. Oh, yeah, take her. Oh, yeah, I got a bunch of them.
Yeah.
There's another daughter. You know what I mean? Like, the daughters really have it bad, like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
The women. But it tells you about the culture of
Mm-hmm.
pretty much just in all the land, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you want to be a son. That's
Ye-
what you want.
Yes.
You want to remember God worked through the culture of the day, through history.
Mm-hmm.
And even though he's doing that, he's not necessarily condoning what's going on.
Yeah.
But he's working through it and making, because the Bible's progressive, so it's moving to a different place.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right. Well, and that's the thing.
natural human history.
Yeah. So if someone critical of the Bible looks at this and goes, look, this is what they did in the Bible, this is the Old Testament, this is the God you serve, and they're like, no. That's the interesting thing about Judges, and a lot of the Old Testament, but Judges specifically, except for the few times, like when they start off one of the stories where it's, oh, the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, they went after idols. That's usually the evil that's talked about. And then a host of horrible things happen, and the author just kind of like takes his hands off and goes like, it's just what's happening. What are you going to make of this? And he's leaving clues all throughout the text of what you're supposed to be getting from it by using other Old Testament allusions to be like, hey, yeah, I'm comparing these people to Sodom and Gomorrah. Like, get the point. I'm comparing these people to the heathens of Ai. And then ending the book with that verse, everyone did that which was right in their own eyes. No king, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And I think that's his way. So one, he's very pro-monarchy, whoever the author is. He sees the civilizing nature of the kingship to come. And I think that's, everyone did that which was right in his own eyes. I think that's like his language for the original fall story, the taking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Because with that, the point is Eve takes good and evil into her own hands and you have this idea that gets played out like, oh yeah, when you take good and evil into your own hands and it's not God's way, God's wisdom, everything falls into sin and degeneration. And you have, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And the author of Judges just leaves you hanging. He just leaves you at this crazy series of events, probably as strange and backwards as you could possibly have gotten from the original. At the beginning we were good. We were conquering, we were taking some stuff in the promised land, and then this is where we end up. And it's that moral message at the end of, hey, without God's leadership, this is what you get in some form or another. So I think that's where I will leave it. If there's anything else anyone wants to say, any questions, any thoughts?
And we're kind of fooled because this happened over hundreds of years.
Yes, it did.
So if you don't see the evidence of sin like immediate, they think nothing of it. But you keep going down that road, as time goes by, it develops and becomes more in a bad way than you ever imagined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a good point, because it is over lifetimes and generations, and people follow God for a while, and then it's like 40, 50 years later, they say, oh, yeah, and by the way, idolatry started creeping back in, and it gets progressively worse. So, all right, so that was the book of Judges. Next week we'll be in Ruth. Right? That was 11 weeks. And next week we'll have the short story of Ruth, and then we have one big wrap-up chapter at the end, which is probably good because we learned about a ton of people. Like there are probably a lot of names that you might know, but you kind of forget who did what, and there's a lot in the book of Judges. So, why don't we just stop there and close in a word of prayer. Lord, we thank you for your word that you've given us, even when it's not what we expect, even when it's hard to understand. And I just thank you for our ability to gather together and study your word and try to dig out a little bit about the massive story of redemption that you have running throughout history. Lord, I just pray that you'd be with us this week and help us to take the lessons that we need with us. In your name, Jesus, I pray. Amen. All right, thank you.